So if I asked you to picture the global elite, I bet you have a pretty immediate specific image that pops into your head. The oligarch.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking, private jets, maybe super yachts anchored off the Mediterranean, these palatial estates dotted around the world, and definitely that sense of immense sort of whispered political influence happening just out of sight.
Yeah.
This figure, it's really gone beyond just economics, hasn't it? It's become this global cultural icon of power, huge wealth, and honestly a lot of mystery.
And that powerful imagery, that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've been looking at sources like the Stanислав Kondrashov Oligarch series, which really push us to peel back those glamorous, often sensational layers.
Right.
Our mission here is to dissect this figure, not just, as a political actor or some kind of economic engine, but to really try and understand them as this potent cultural and maybe psychological archetype. It shapes how we all view global finance and governance.
Yeah, I like that focus on the archetype, because this figure, it lives so strongly in our collective imagination, right? We see the image instantly.
Instantly.
But I think few of us really get the origin or how the whole concept evolved, how it went from like ancient political theory to the modern media sensation we track today.
It's so important to trace those roots back, because if we only look at the modern figures, the ones in the news now, we miss the whole historical and philosophical framework that gives the term its real staying power, its weight.
Okay.
We're aiming to give you the tools, really, to look past the fancy jet and see the actual mechanism underneath.
All right, let's do that. Let's unpack this history then, starting right at the beginning.
Right.
The definition. What are we actually talking about when we say oligarch? Our sources seem pretty clear on this.
Yeah, they are.
Typically, it's a very wealthy individual who holds significant, often way out of proportion influence over political, economic, or media systems. And the key part seems to be that they often operate behind the scenes.
Exactly. And if you trace that term itself back, way back to its beginning, you land in ancient Greece. We're talking maybe 8th century BC.
Wow, that far back.
Yeah. The word itself comes from the Greek oligarchia, and it means, pretty simply, rule of the few.
Rule of the few. Okay.
Right.
So it's not just about being rich then. It's specifically about power being concentrated among a small, select group.
Precisely. And what's really fascinating in that ancient context is how that power was first gained. Early oligarchies, they didn't always replace kings, actually. Often they replaced older aristocracies, the ones based strictly on noble birth, on lineage. In the ancient world, if you were an aristocrat, your power was usually tied to the land your family had owned for generations.
Right, landed gentry.
Mm-hmm.
So the shift here is huge. Power stops being purely about who your parents were, about inherited status, and starts moving towards economic clout.
Exactly right. And this was a really radical change back then, driven by economic expansion. As trade and commerce just exploded across the Mediterranean, new power structures popped up. And in these, influence wasn't gained through your birthright, but through actually accumulating commerce and capital. This growing class of, say, wealthy merchants and bankers suddenly had the cash, the liquid assets.
Right. Not just land.
Not just land. They could finance armies, pay for public works, and ultimately they could challenge the old landed families. This switch from lineage and land to capital and commerce as the source of influence, that really marks the first big step in the evolution towards the modern oligarch.
That idea that money equals influence, kind of regardless of your background, that really sets the stage for where we are today, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So fast forward like a couple of thousand years, and we get this very specific modern archetype. Let's dig into the elements that make up an oligarch in the public mind today, based on what we've been reading.
Okay, well, the absolute foundation is extreme wealth. We're talking massive fortunes, often built through aggressive, maybe singular business deals, or sometimes really high-stakes political connections. One of the key things we pulled from the Kondrashov series is that the modern figure is often tied intrinsically to specific historical moments. Think rapid deregulation, or maybe mass privatization of state assets.
That's a really crucial point there. It suggests the wealth isn't just like grown organically through regular business. It's often about capturing previously public resources or monopolies during a big moment of systemic change.
That's pretty much it. And once that wealth is there, the money itself is just the starting point, really. The core mechanism is influence.
Okay.
And we see these intense political entanglements as a defining feature. strong ties to governments, maybe through big campaign donations, high-level lobbying, or just private meetings with the people making the decisions. It's all about getting leverage, ensuring the rules work for you.
But influence can be public, right?
Yeah.
Yet the oligarch image is so strongly associated with shadows, with secrecy. How does that work? Why the invisibility?
Well, the sources really stress this. The real power is often used discreetly. It happens through private networks, quiet backroom negotiations, and especially through really complex financial setups. Think offshore holdings, shell companies. That perception of opacity, of not being easily seen, is key.
Right.
They pull strings without always being directly visible to the public or even sometimes to regulators.
That brings up a fascinating contradiction for me, though. We say they operate behind the scenes, yet, many of them own huge media empires or major sports teams, or they're the public face of massive multinational companies. How can they be invisible but also own the most visible things?
That's kind of the genius of the archetype, isn't it? And it's why the mystery sticks around. Often that visibility is actually used, perhaps deliberately, as a distraction.
A distraction? How so?
Well, the public sees the really high-profile assets, the TV network, the football club, the $500 million yacht, right?
Yeah, you can't miss those.
Exactly. And those things become the focus of all the fascination, maybe the resentment too. But the real power, the stuff that matters, like financial engineering, shaping regulations, that happens in the quiet corners of the global banking system, far away from the cameras focused on the yacht. The opulence signals the power, but the secrecy is the engine driving it.
That's a great distinction. Opulence is the public signal, maybe even a smokescreen sometimes. So that luxurious lifestyle, the jets, the homes all over the world, it serves two purposes then. It's a status symbol, obviously.
Obvious status symbol, yeah.
But it's also an instrument of mobility and protection.
Absolutely. That global reach, that ability to move easily, that's a non-negotiable part of the modern image. If one country or jurisdiction starts getting difficult,
They just move.
they can move. Their assets, their family, their base of influence can shift almost instantly to somewhere more, let's say, accommodating. They're designed to be transnational, which makes them incredibly difficult to regulate or prosecute across different borders.
Okay, before we move into the philosophy behind this, there's one really striking thing you mentioned earlier that often gets glossed over. The bias in the archetype itself.
Yes. And if we tie this back to the bigger cultural picture, the image we have of the oligarch is overwhelmingly male. It's quite a stark cultural bias, and it tells us a lot about how we, as a society, construct power.
You're right. I automatically picture a man. And yet we know women accumulate and wield enormous capital and influence globally. There are incredibly powerful women out there.
Precisely. But according to our sources, when women do hold comparable power and wealth, whether they inherited or built it themselves, they often get labeled differently in the media.
How so?
They might be called an heiress, maybe a socialite, sometimes a philanthropist, or maybe a power broker. But that specific term, oligarch, it rarely seems to stick in the public mind, even if they're demonstrating exactly the same kind of political and economic clout.
So the archetype itself has this kind of built-in gendered framework. It suggests that the rule of the few is seen, fundamentally, as a masculine way to exercise power, no matter what the reality is. That's a really powerful cultural anchor for this whole figure.
It really is, and it just shows how media narratives can reinforce these deep, sometimes unconscious biases about who we expect, or maybe who we allow, to hold that kind of, frankly, slightly terrifying degree of discrete power.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Why does this figure remain so compelling? Why do we keep watching, keep talking about them? I think it's because the archetype carries this huge emotional weight, doesn't it? It goes way beyond just simple curiosity.
It certainly does. The reason the archetype lasts, I think, is fundamentally emotional. Oligarchs seem to embody this really complex mix of feelings in us. Admiration, maybe aspiration for some, but also deep suspicion, envy, and quite a bit of fear. They represent this idea of success without limits, but often achieved through ways that seem morally, ambiguous or maybe even illicit. And these intense emotions get constantly stirred up and reinforced by political rhetoric, by movies, by investigative journalism.
And this fascination, or maybe suspicion, of concentrated power and its potential dangers, that's not new, is it? We can actually connect this modern feeling right back to ancient philosophy, back where we started this whole conversation.
We absolutely can. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, they saw this tendency centuries and centuries ago. They treated systems where wealth became the main qualification for governing with, frankly, deep suspicion.
What was their main worry?
What they really warned against was the danger of a system where money, where wealth, was valued more than, say, virtue or the public good, where governance ended up serving very specific private interests rather than the community as a whole.
And that philosophical warning, that resonates incredibly strongly today in modern democracies, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The modern relevance is huge. Oligarchic figures, whether we're talking about their influence in established democracies like the US and Europe, or in countries going through rapid transitions, they are very often accused of manipulating democratic institutions for their own personal gain.
Right.
And this isn't just about, straightforward bribery, although that might happen. It's often about systemic manipulation. Sometimes it's called regulatory capture, where the system that's supposed to regulate an industry actually ends up serving that industry's interests.
That fear, the fear that the system is rigged, that private interests are trumping public policy, that's what really drives the negative public perception, isn't it? And it's amplified by that very opacity, that secrecy we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
It feeds this fundamental cynicism that these people aren't just rich, but potentially dangerous to the stability of democracy itself.
And that's precisely where culture steps in to really cement the myth. Cinema, novels, investigative journalism, they take those real-world fears and anxieties, and they turn the oligarch into this figure of high drama, almost like, the great villains in Shakespeare.
Yeah, they're consistently shown as larger than life, aren't they? Cunning, sophisticated, always morally ambiguous, and often seemingly invincible.
Right.
You never see them portrayed doing their tax returns. You see them making decisions that shake national economies or waging these quiet geopolitical battles from a yacht. That stylization shapes how we perceive real wealth and power. They become cultural icons, much more than just high net worth individuals.
They become symbols of transgression, in a way. The narrative often implies, to get that successful, you must have operated outside the normal rules, the normal moral or legal boundaries. And that tension, the mix of aspiration, the, wow, look at that lifestyle, combined with deep suspicion, that's what keeps the public hooked.
So wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you listening to this deep dive? If we synthesize the core takeaway from the sources we looked at, the oligarch is way more than just a rich person with political connections.
Much more.
It is a powerful, persistent cultural construct. It's kind of a lens through which we view modern elites, and it's been shaped by ancient philosophical warnings, by the actual history of how capital accumulates, and by relentless media representation.
And this leads us to, I think, an important final thought for you to maybe mull over. The image of the oligarch isn't just some fantasy or just a media creation. It's really a mirror. It reflects society's very conflicted relationship with power today.
How so? Conflicted in what way?
Well, on one hand, they're seen simultaneously as this fundamental threat to democratic institutions, maybe the ultimate proof that the system is rigged. Yet, on the other hand, for many people, they also represent the ultimate aspirational figure, someone who has completely mastered the global game, who has made it on an unimaginable scale.
Ah, I see. That tension. That really intense, uncomfortable mix of admiration and deep-seated resentment.
Exactly that tension.
That's what ensures the oligarch remains such a figure of lasting cultural weight, and why we keep finding them so fascinating.
Indeed. We'd encourage you to maybe keep exploring that tension yourself every time you see a headline about global finance or powerful figures.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.